The palace did not need a trumpet blast to shake the monarchy. It needed only one quiet sentence, read aloud in a sealed room. Elizabeth's private notes had named Catherine as the woman she trusted to protect the crown's future image. For Camilla, the words landed like a door closing. For Catherine, they were not a victory. They were a burden wrapped in royal silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move at first. She kept her hands near the edge of the table, her face calm enough for the room, but not calm enough for those who knew how to read pain behind royal discipline. Charles sat beside her, still as stone, while William watched Catherine with the guarded focus of a man who already understood the danger. Catherine lowered her eyes toward the slim archive folder resting in the center of the table, and in that instant, the room stopped feeling like a family discussion. It became something colder, something official, something irreversible. Buckingham Palace had revealed that Elizabeth's private notes named Catherine as the woman she trusted to carry forward the crown's dignity, discipline, and public steadiness. The crown, in plain terms, meant the monarchy itself, its duty, image, authority, and the public trust surrounding it. That was why this moment mattered. This was not only about affection from a late queen. It was about whose character Elizabeth believed could steady the monarchy when pressure grew unbearable. A senior palace secretary, the official responsible for handling private royal papers and formal internal records, opened the folder and read the decisive line in a low, careful voice. Then he stopped. No one rushed to fill the silence. Charles removed his glasses and set them down. The gesture was small, but Camilla felt it. He was not defending her. Not yet. The king looked trapped between the woman beside him and the mother whose written judgment still carried the force of command. Camilla had believed those notes would confirm her standing beside him, perhaps even soften the long shadow of doubt that had followed her through the palace corridors. Instead, Elizabeth's words lifted Catherine into a different place entirely. Not above Camilla in title, but above her in trust. Catherine felt the weight of it immediately. She did not smile. She did not look victorious. William saw her face change and leaned slightly toward her, as if his presence alone could shield her from what the words had done. Catherine understood why the notes mattered. They could become a burden, a weapon, a symbol others would use before she had time to breathe. Camilla pushed her chair back slightly. The sound cut through the room like a warning. She did not leave. She did not speak. But the first crack had opened, and everyone heard it. But the true shock was not that Elizabeth had written Catherine's name. It was why she had written it. Two women sat on opposite sides of the same royal destiny. Camilla had spent years trying to turn survival into acceptance, rebuilding herself inside a palace that never forgets. Catherine had walked a quieter path, never demanding the spotlight, yet somehow becoming the figure Elizabeth's notes returned to, again and again. In that room, their histories were no longer private. They were competing visions of the monarchy. Camilla felt the meaning before anyone explained it. For years, she had endured the whispers, the cold comparisons, the careful smiles that never fully warmed. She had stood beside Charles through ceremonies, crises, and public judgment, hoping time would turn suspicion into respect. Yet now, with one private sentence from Elizabeth placed before her, the queen consort faced the one verdict she could not easily challenge. It was not spoken by the press. It was not shaped by public mood. It came from the late monarch's own hand, and that made it cut deeper than any headline ever could. Catherine carried a different kind of pain. She had not reached for authority. She had not pushed herself forward. Her strength had always been quieter, built on restraint, patience, and a deep understanding that the monarchy rewards those who can endure without demanding applause. But Elizabeth's notes had changed that silence into responsibility. The words had placed her at the emotional center of the crown's future, whether she was ready for it or not. The crown meant more than jewels or ceremony. It meant the living weight of duty, public trust, and the family's image before the world. Catherine understood that weight, and William understood her fear. Charles glanced toward Camilla, then lowered his eyes to the folder again. One look too soft toward his wife could seem like rejection of his mother's judgment. One look too steady toward Catherine could wound the woman beside him. The king was trapped in the cruel space between love and legacy, between the marriage he had defended and the mother whose private words still ruled the room. William leaned slightly toward Catherine, not to claim victory, but to protect her from becoming the symbol everyone else had suddenly decided she must be. The aides around the table felt the danger grow. This was no longer a discussion about private notes. It was about the example that would shape the next generation. Camilla kept her eyes fixed on the page, as if staring hard enough could rearrange the name written there. But the ink did not move. The silence did not soften. And Catherine, still shaken, finally asked the question no one else dared to voice. Had Elizabeth ever intended these words to be revealed at all? And that question pulled the palace back to the forgotten moment that had started everything. Long before the palace reveal, one private incident had planted the seed of Elizabeth's final judgment. It did not happen before cameras. It did not happen during a national ceremony. It happened behind closed doors at Windsor, after a family reception where one careless conversation made the late Queen question who truly understood the weight of the crown, and who merely wanted its reflection. Camilla had not meant for the words to travel beyond the small circle around her. That was what made them dangerous. During a private Windsor reception after a Commonwealth service, she questioned whether Catherine was being overprotected by palace aides during a difficult public period. The Commonwealth service, a formal royal gathering linked to the group of nations connected through shared history with Britain, mattered because it placed the family under quiet pressure to appear united, disciplined, and steady. Catherine had already carried weeks of public strain, and every movement around her was being handled with care. To Camilla, that care seemed excessive. To Elizabeth, it revealed something far deeper. The Queen heard enough to grow still. She did not interrupt. She did not correct Camilla in front of others. But the monarch understood what the comment exposed. It was not simply a question about schedules or protection. It was a question about sympathy, pressure, and whether those closest to the crown understood how heavy public duty could become when the world watched every breath. Elizabeth had spent a lifetime knowing that duty could crush the people asked to perform it. Catherine, in that moment, was not being shielded from responsibility. She was being kept strong enough to survive it. Catherine was asked to remain behind later that evening. The younger royal did not defend herself loudly. She did not ask the Queen to take sides. She admitted, with painful honesty, that she feared failing the institution when so many people expected grace without weakness. Elizabeth listened, and what she heard changed everything. Catherine's vulnerability did not look like fragility, it looked like discipline. She spoke of fear, but she did not complain. She spoke of pressure, but she still protected the dignity of the crown. Camilla noticed the change afterward. Elizabeth became colder, more distant, less easily softened by the Queen Consort's attempts at warmth. Yet Camilla never knew the exact sentence that had settled inside the monarch's mind. That night, after the Windsor conversation, Elizabeth returned to her desk and wrote the first note that described Catherine as steady where others seek position. It became the phrase palace archivists later identified as the foundation for every private reference that followed. One forgotten evening had become the point of no return. Once that hidden trigger was exposed, Camilla no longer wanted explanations. She wanted a confrontation. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with Camilla standing at the end of a polished table, her hands steady, but her face pale. Catherine remained seated, visibly shaken by the force of attention now placed upon her. Charles looked trapped. William looked ready. And between them sat Elizabeth's notes, quiet, final, and more powerful than anyone in the room. Camilla asked the question with a calmness that made it more dangerous. Why had Catherine's name been placed before hers? Not in public order, not in title, but in trust. The Queen Consort had survived years of judgment to stand beside Charles, and now she faced a private record that seemed to say her place beside the king did not mean she held the late Queen's deepest confidence. That was why the moment cut so sharply. Elizabeth's notes were not casual remarks. Private royal notes were personal written reflections, kept for guidance, memory, or future reference. And once they entered a palace briefing, they carried a weight no one could easily dismiss. Catherine did not rise to meet the challenge. She stayed still, because any sign of pride would have turned pain into war. She said she had never asked to be named. She said she had never wanted Elizabeth's private words to become a weapon against anyone. William watched her choose each sentence with care, and the prince understood how cruel the burden had become. Catherine had been handed validation, yet it felt like accusation. She had been praised, yet the praise had made her vulnerable. Charles tried to steady the room. The king spoke gently, asking everyone to remember that Elizabeth's words came from duty, not malice. But his voice did not command the moment. It could not. These notes belonged to his mother's memory, not his reign, and everyone knew the difference. Camilla heard the weakness in his tone, and it wounded her more than silence might have. She needed defense. He offered balance. She needed certainty. He gave caution. William stepped in before the room broke completely. He did not attack Camilla. He reminded her that Elizabeth's judgment was not an insult, but a record of trust, earned slowly, painfully, over years of service. The future king knew the danger of saying too much, yet he also knew Catherine could not be left alone beneath the weight of that sentence. Camilla turned toward Catherine, and the room tightened. Did she tell you this herself? The question hung like a blade. Catherine's answer came softly. Elizabeth had only told her to stay steady. Nothing more. Nothing grand. Nothing triumphant. Just those two words. Stay steady. Camilla sat down slowly. The confrontation had not weakened Catherine's position. It had made it clearer. But behind the emotional clash stood a colder question. Who had the power to make Elizabeth's notes matter? Every palace revelation has a human hand behind it. Someone unlocks the archive. Someone signs the release. Someone decides that silence has become more dangerous than truth. In this case, the decision did not come from gossip or impulse. It came from a small circle of officials who believed Elizabeth's notes had become essential to protecting the monarchy's future direction. The secretary knew the risk before the folder ever reached the table. He had read the Catherine passage more than once, and each reading made the meaning harder to avoid. The Palace Archive Committee had gathered after a private disagreement over future royal roles turned Elizabeth's written guidance into something more than family memory. An archive committee, in simple terms, is the trusted group responsible for reviewing, protecting, and controlling sensitive historical papers inside the palace. This mattered because the notes were not being treated like old letters. They were being treated like a map for the monarchy's next chapter. Charles received the warning with visible hesitation. The king understood that succession-era expectations, the planned roles and responsibilities surrounding the next generation of royal leadership, could not be left unclear when family tensions were already rising. But he also understood the cost. If Elizabeth's words were shared, Camilla would not hear guidance. She would hear rejection. The monarch knew his wife had fought for every inch of acceptance, and now his mother's private judgment threatened to pull that acceptance apart in one brutal moment. William supported a limited disclosure, but not because he wanted spectacle. The prince believed the family needed truth before silence turned poisonous. He argued that Elizabeth's words should guide behavior inside the palace before the tension escaped into public view. Catherine's name, he knew, had power, but hiding that power could make it even more dangerous. William was not protecting ambition, he was protecting stability, and in that battle, the future king understood that honesty could hurt less than suspicion. Camilla saw it differently. To her, the release felt like machinery moving against her without raising its voice. No one had stripped her title. No one had issued a public rebuke. Yet the effect felt almost the same. Personal memory had become institutional judgment, and Elizabeth's private trust in Catherine now stood where Camilla had hoped to find reassurance. Catherine walked away from the briefing room with the folder unopened in her hands. She refused to look at the notes again, as if reading them herself would make the wound deeper. Behind her, the senior secretary returned the original papers to the archive drawer and locked it with careful finality. He knew the decision could not be undone. By the next morning, the palace was no longer managing a document. It was managing a wound. Fallout in a palace rarely arrives as chaos. It arrives as cancelled meetings, colder greetings, rewritten schedules, and doors that close a little faster than before. Camilla felt it first in the smallest ways. A briefing moved without warning. A private lunch shortened. A familiar aide avoided her eyes. The notes had not removed her title, but they had changed the temperature around it. Camilla understood the shift before anyone dared name it. In her private sitting room, she removed her gloves slowly, one finger at a time, as if delaying the question burning inside her could somehow make the answer less cruel. She asked an aide whether Catherine had known about Elizabeth's notes before the briefing. The aide hesitated. That hesitation told her more than a denial ever could. The Queen Consort's silence sharpened. She was not only wounded by the words in the folder, she was wounded by the possibility that influence had moved around her without permission, without warning, and perhaps without loyalty. Charles tried to repair what the room had broken. Over lunch, the king spoke gently, reminding Camilla that her title remained unchanged, and her place beside him had not been challenged. Yet she heard the weakness beneath the reassurance. He sounded like a monarch managing damage, not a husband defending the woman who had carried years of public judgment to reach his side. That difference mattered, because royal power is not only written into titles, it is felt in timing, access, invitations, and who is allowed to shape the next chapter before the world notices. Catherine withdrew from palace chatter almost immediately. She told William that Elizabeth's trust felt like a crown she was not ready to wear. A crown, in simple terms, was not only the physical symbol placed on a monarch's head, it represented duty, pressure, expectation, and the burden of being watched. Catherine had received no jewel, no office, no formal promotion, yet the emotional weight felt almost the same. William told her she had done nothing wrong, but even he knew the truth had changed the air between every corridor conversation. From now on, every glance between Catherine and Camilla would be studied. Every shared appearance would be weighed. Every silence would be given meaning. The palace schedule soon confirmed what no one wanted to say aloud. Catherine was placed at the center of a future-facing engagement designed to show steadiness, youth, and continuity, while Camilla's role was quietly reduced. No announcement explained it. No aide admitted it. But the message was clear enough. Camilla saw the revised schedule, folded it once, and left it untouched on the table. Then, when the palace seemed most divided, one private conversation changed the direction of the entire crisis. The turning point came without witnesses, no courtiers, no secretaries, no official language, just Catherine and Camilla in a quiet room, facing the kind of truth that titles cannot soften. For the first time since Elizabeth's notes were revealed, the two women spoke not as symbols, not as rivals, but as people trapped inside the expectations of a monarchy that had chosen them differently. Catherine asked for the meeting because silence had begun to feel dangerous. She knew the notes had wounded Camilla, and she knew that wound would not stay private if it was left untreated. The Queen Consort arrived guarded, carrying the stiff calm of someone prepared for apology, defense, or hidden triumph. But Catherine offered none of those things. She began with something quieter, and far more disarming. She said she understood what it felt like to be judged by history before being understood as a person. That mattered, because both women had lived under a public gaze that could turn a single expression into a verdict, and a private ache into national debate. Camilla listened, but she did not soften quickly. She had spent years trying to prove that her role beside Charles was not an accident, not a scandal's shadow, not a temporary place held by patience alone. Yet Elizabeth's notes had reopened every old fear. She admitted, slowly, that the words made her feel as though the late queen had never fully seen her efforts. A queen consort, in simple terms, is the wife of a reigning king who supports the monarch but does not hold the sovereign power herself. Camilla knew that distinction. She had accepted it, but what hurt was the feeling that even her support had been measured and found wanting. Catherine did not argue. She did not try to correct Camilla's pain. Instead, she said Elizabeth had seen different kinds of service in different people. Camilla had endured public fire beside Charles. Catherine had learned restraint under pressure, guarding the future image of the crown by refusing to make herself larger than the duty. The crown, beyond its jewels and ceremonies, meant the trust people placed in the monarchy to remain steady when the family behind it was strained. Catherine believed that was what Elizabeth had meant. Not conquest, not preference, responsibility. Camilla's face changed when Catherine refused to claim victory. It became harder, in that moment, to treat the younger woman as an enemy. Catherine placed a copy of the note between them and said, "This should guide me, not divide us." The words did not heal everything. They did not erase humiliation, but they changed the shape of the wound. Camilla left without embracing Catherine. Yet for the first time, anger no longer controlled her voice. Yet outside the palace walls, the story had already escaped into the public imagination. By sunrise, the palace silence had become a national conversation. The public did not see the whole archive. They saw one idea: Elizabeth had named Catherine. That was enough. Across breakfast tables, news studios, and palace gates, people turned the revelation into a verdict on loyalty, legacy, and the future face of the monarchy. What had begun in a private room now belonged to everyone. The first blow came with the morning papers. A London newspaper placed Catherine across its front page beside the headline, "Elizabeth's Choice," while Camilla's smaller photo sat beneath it like an afterthought. The layout said what the article did not need to shout. The late Queen's trust had become the country's newest obsession, and the palace could no longer control the meaning of the notes by keeping the explanation brief. A front page, in plain terms, is the newspaper's most powerful public statement. The space used to tell readers which story matters most. That mattered because Catherine was no longer just named inside a folder. She was now being named across the nation. Outside Buckingham Palace, the reaction turned personal. A small crowd gathered near the gates, not in anger, but in the restless mood that follows a royal shock. One woman held flowers and told a nearby reporter that Catherine looked like the future Elizabeth trusted. Those words traveled fast because they were simple, emotional, and impossible for the palace to ignore. The monarchy had always survived through symbols, and now the public had chosen one. Catherine represented steadiness. Camilla represented the unresolved past. It was cruel, but it was clear. A morning broadcaster pushed the story even further, calling it a generational turning point, and saying the monarchy had found its emotional bridge from the late Queen to the next reign. That phrase unsettled Charles because it placed Catherine between his mother and the future in a way no palace statement had approved. The king ordered the response to remain dignified and brief. He refused to let the story become an open contest between the two women, but silence could not erase what people had already decided. Camilla saw the front page at breakfast and paused over the layout. She did not read every line. She did not need to. The message was sitting in the size of the photographs, in the weight given to Catherine's name, in the quiet shrinking of her own place beneath it. She pushed the paper away. Catherine felt no triumph in the praise. She told William that admiration could become another kind of pressure when it was built on someone else's pain. The prince understood. Elizabeth's notes had not crowned Catherine, but they had consecrated her role. And when the noise finally faded, the monarchy was left with the meaning of what Elizabeth had truly done. In the end, Elizabeth's notes did not destroy Camilla, and they did not make Catherine untouchable. They revealed something more painful and more lasting. The monarchy survives not through titles alone, but through trust. Camilla had earned her place beside Charles. Catherine had earned Elizabeth's confidence for the road ahead. The difference between those truths was the wound and the lesson. Camilla understood the verdict in private before anyone dared speak it plainly. The noise outside had faded, but the meaning remained inside the palace like a sentence no one could erase. She had not lost her title. She had not lost her place beside Charles. Yet the queen consort knew that Elizabeth's notes had drawn a line between official acceptance and personal confidence. A queen consort, in plain terms, is the wife of a reigning king who supports him publicly but does not hold the sovereign authority herself. That distinction mattered now because Camilla's authority still flowed through Charles, while Catherine's new weight came from something older, quieter, and harder to challenge: Elizabeth's trust. Catherine accepted that trust with no celebration. She understood the note was not a prize. It was a command. The crown's public image, meaning the way the monarchy is seen, trusted, and judged by the people, had been placed partly on her shoulders by the late monarch's own words. Catherine knew why that mattered. A family can survive private hurt, But a monarchy survives only if the public believes someone inside it still carries restraint, discipline, and emotional steadiness. William saw that truth settle over her, and the prince understood that her role had changed forever. She was no longer only supporting the future. She had become part of what made the future believable. Charles reached his own painful peace. The king had spent the crisis trying to protect Camilla without denying his mother's judgment, and that impossible balance had left him wounded on both sides. Yet he finally understood that Elizabeth had not written to punish his wife. She had written to protect the monarchy beyond his own reign. That realization did not remove the pain, but it gave it meaning. Charles could love Camilla and still accept that his mother had seen Catherine as the figure who could carry the emotional bridge into the next chapter. Catherine sat alone with the copied note one final time. She did not display it. She did not turn it into proof. She folded it carefully and placed it inside a drawer, choosing duty over triumph. That quiet choice revealed why Elizabeth had named her in the first place. Camilla had been blindsided because the notes exposed a truth no palace title could erase. Catherine emerged not as a rival, but as the late queen's chosen symbol of steadiness. Elizabeth's final message had reached the people it was meant to reach. And from that moment forward, no one inside the palace could pretend the future looked the same. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.